Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Scott Koenig.
I think that's on. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, we're good? Good. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm not so sure about a sophisticated English accent. I'll do my best, and I'll try and speak slowly. Something my US business colleague said to me when I arrived in December was, please slow it down, Scott. Just slow it down a little bit. I want to understand what you're saying. So thank you for the invitation to come here today and speak to you all. I'm really excited about doing this, and I'm going to leave enough room at the end for questions. So save some up during the presentation, scribble them down, the questions you have, so I can help you out with anything you want to know about the real world of business, certainly in a social enterprise like Better World Books. The title of my presentation is Escape Velocity from Startup to Stay Up. And it's a perspective from my experience at Better World Books. I come from the kind of corporate world, big corporate entities, big companies, lots of people, very well established, been going for many years, to a business that's only 10 years old. When I joined it, it was 7 years old. UK business was about a year and a half old when I joined that. So I got quite a shock coming to a startup company. I'd done lots of sort of entrepreneurial roles within those companies that were mentioned earlier. But this was a real, proper startup. This company was started by people like you. Better World Books was 3 Notre Dame students who got together and had some books left over from the end of their studies and tried to sell them to the next year of students. And they found they could. And they sold them at a discount to the current new price, and they thought this was pretty cool. They made some money. So they went and asked their friends if they could give them their books, and they'd sell their books for them as well. And that worked pretty well too, and the books sold pretty fast, and they kept going. Eventually, we've got a $68 million company in revenue from those very early seeds 10 years ago. So it really is a startup success, and it really does come from people just like you, college people who got stuck in, found a place in the market, and developed a business. And what I want to share with you is the experience of being in a company that's going through not just the startup phase, but the stay-up phase. The point where you've done the startup, you've established the business, you're growing fast, you've got some new people you've brought in, you've got existing people who you've promoted from within, and now you're trying to stay there, you're trying to grow to the next level. Escape velocity, break free of the Earth's atmosphere. Point at that, yes, there we go. So this is, for those who, I understand there's engineers in the room, so you probably know a little bit more about this than I do. I understand the answer is 11 kilometers a second, something like that. To get escape velocity. This is the sort of theme I've chosen for where we need to go in Better World Books. Gravity is holding us back right now. We've reached that point where we need the next boost, the next big push on. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that as we go through the presentation today. So this was the destructive model back in 2003 to 2005. This is what the guys dreamt up. Be a book company with a real mission. And that was really important to them. So those of you who have studied the B Corps, in fact, could you just put a quick show of hands on who has studied B Corps? So a few of you know what that is. It's basically an organization, a non-profit organization, that seeks out companies who are sustainable in the way they approach business and who approach business in an appropriate way for the 21st century. You can make a profit if you're a B Corps, but you need to do it in a thoughtful way. And they have like a 17-page questionnaire that we have to fill in on a regular basis and answer correctly and answer in the affirmative if we're going to remain a B Corps. And that keeps us very honest. That helps us to run our company in a very honest and appropriate way. They dreamt up the idea of getting books by solving others' pain. Now this was public libraries. They figured out that if they went to public libraries and asked them to give them the books they no longer wanted, they could use those books, sell them, and give a return back to the libraries. At that time, the libraries were putting these books they didn't want in the ground. They were burying them. They were putting them in landfill. And Better World Books came along and said, don't do that. We can reuse, we can recycle, we can repurpose these books, and we can build a business that can make a profit at the same time. We developed a business that knows which ones to keep. That's really important. Today, we will process 1 million books a week. 1 million books going through our warehouse in Indiana. 1 million books every single week. We don't want all those books. Some of those books we can sell. Some of those books we'll never sell. Some of those books we'll donate. Some of those books, people like Books for Africa, will ask us to keep, set aside, and send to them, so they can send those books out to Africa to help children who don't have any books. So we have to decide which ones to keep. That requires algorithms. So a lot of the work that was done in these early days was building a system we call Indaba, our very own system built by the guys at Better World Books to do what we needed to do to run our business. And out of that came a new business, which was selling Indaba to other booksellers. So that was interesting. We found another business within our own business. Knowing what price to charge. Again, this is very much a analytical piece of work that you have to do. You go out and you scrape data from websites, you find out what other people are pricing at, and then you price competitively against that. Very important, you have to know what price to sell at. To know the economics of giving, if you're going to donate books, you're going to be using trucks, to take those books out to donate them. And that costs you money. You don't get a return on it, it's a donation. So you have to figure that out. You only have to donate in volume. You have to make sure that you donate the right books, making sure when the book gets there, it's actually used. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. And you have to get economies of scale across all functions. I mean, that's business 101, right? Economies of scale, you have to get economies of scale. And you'll see in a moment, we rushed really fast to get those 1 million books into the warehouse every week. That was our primary goal in Better World Books. And to maximize the addressable market. This was important as well. We've got, let's think now, it's 52 marketplaces at the moment. We are on worldwide. Obvious ones like Amazon, but when you get into Amazon, you've got Amazon France, you've got Amazon Germany, you've got Amazon.com, you've got Amazon.co.uk, Italy, Spain, they go on forever. Brazil's coming soon, as well as eBay, and other less known marketplaces like Libris that we're also on. So maximize your addressable market. And seek partners who are customer focused always. That was really important. We weren't selling to the end user. We weren't a retailer in a high street where we would be the face the customer would see and we would be the experience the customer would get. We were trading through other people's marketplaces. So it's really important to pick people like Amazon who are totally customer focused. That was important for us. And then seek venture investment from aligned investors. And I'll spend some more time on this in just a second. So this is a typical startup investment cycle, the rocket fuel, if you like, in this spaceship that's going to break free of the Earth's atmosphere. Starting up at this end here with some angels and the idea. Those graduates were back down this end here on the left. And then the early customers, then growth, and then expansion. And the venture capital piece is really, really important because you're going to go out and you're going to borrow X amount of money. I think in our case it was $4 or $5 million to make sure we can get this economy of scale, to really, really push on, to really grow, to power with this idea, this business model, really bank that initial success that we'd had. But when you do that, you've got to be sure that the person investing in you, or the people investing in you, are aligned with your values, are aligned with what you're trying to do, have a goal horizon for what they want from this investment that is appropriate to what you want from this investment and from what you want from the company. And that's a very important moment in the company's history where you could argue we got it a little bit right and we got it a little bit wrong. In the main, it was okay, but very, very important. And any of you that go out and start your own companies, pause at this piece long enough to really think about who you're working with, who's giving you the money to grow your company. It's the most important part of what you'll do in a startup. Oops, excuse me. There. So we raised the money, and we went out, and we grew. We grew real fast. We got a lot of books. We hired a sales team, about 24 people, I think it was, all based here in Alpharetta. And they went out, and they signed up about 4,000 libraries really quick. No one else was in the market right then. We were getting out there fast, getting ourselves on the doorstep quickly. We put these things out, drop boxes. You'll see these around Atlanta. You may even have seen them, right? Get some nods around the room. And those are metal bins with a sensor in the top so we know when they're full. And we collect books in those from the public, people who don't want these books anymore. It's like a thrift shop where you drop the books off. This is the same thing, and you put them in a metal box. We've got 1,500 from East Coast to West Coast, from the north to the south. They're everywhere. A lot of them are around Atlanta, a lot around Indiana, but they're everywhere. We got ourselves a warehouse, 300,000 square feet. It's about 200 people in there. It's massive. Everybody goes there, looks out across all these books. There's 5 million books in there and goes, wow, it's just amazing. I was used to running groups of high street bookstores, like 50 bookstores at a time. And I would go and see these bookstores, and the biggest we had was like, I don't know, 20,000 square feet. And it had nowhere near this many books. This just looks incredible when you get in there. So there was the warehouse. We built the warehouse. We put some trucks on the road, because putting trucks on the road meant we could do the pickups more effectively. We did the marketplaces we talked about, and we invested in our own website. And around the time we put together our own website, bwb.com, we also opened bwb.co.uk, and we opened a UK warehouse, which is in Dunfermline in Scotland, over in the UK. Scotland is still in the UK. Just in case you missed that news. I was on tenterhooks, so I only left in December. I didn't know what I was going to be going back to. So we opened up the website in the UK, and we've now got about 1.5 million books in the UK warehouse, and it's a very successful little business with higher margins than the US business, which they're very proud of. What else have we got on that picture? There's the angel investors in the middle there. And then we put this in, a sortation system, into our warehouse in Indiana, which enabled us to take the waste books, the books we didn't want from those 1 million books we're processing a week, and to wholesale them. So we could say to Books for Africa, tell us what books you want. We could say to Chegg, who do book rentals, student book rentals, tell us what books you want. Follett, anybody else who wanted to buy books off us, we could sort those books now for them, set them aside, and open up a wholesale business. So there's a third business we've been able to develop on top of the initial core business. Now, as you go through all this, as you go through this growing a business, remember it's about 10, 11 years now, you need a different leader at each stage. You need to develop the leadership of the company. It's very hard to keep the same focus and the same style all the way through from startup to stay up. And this kind of tries to capture some of that. You've got this scalable startup leader who's entrepreneurial, driven learning and discovery, superstar, CEO, personal contribution, 24/7 commitment. I mean, look at it. It looks terrifying. Process, hates and eliminates. I love that box. I really am upset that we ever have to lose that as we move to the right of that box. Autocratic, star system, into transition, and then finally to large company. Right now, we find ourselves with our leadership, with our CEO, sort of moving along here, roughly in the middle there of that, between those last two boxes. So the captain of the starship, as we lift off, needs to develop as Picard did from Captain Kirk. It's the same kind of thing. As we look back at the company, we realized that maybe there's some stuff that we embedded in those early days, that early business model, that was going to hold us back. We could already see that gravitational pull on the company being able to really break free and become all it could be. And this is this, I don't know if you've read Jim Collins. If you haven't read Jim Collins, do look him up. He's a great author. These books have been out for quite a while. I think the lecturers in the room remember when these books are published, but they're certainly fairly old now, I think, maybe 10, 15 years old. They're built to last at least. And these are fantastic companies. And fantastic books. What Jim Collins says is the foundation for any company that wants to be built to last is to have a business model that actually supports that objective. And again, if you're going to go out there and start a company, think that way. I said earlier, think about the financials that you put in place, the investment that you get, make sure it's aligned with what you want to do. This is part of that. Think about your business model for the future. Can you really expand this? And that's hard to do when you're just starting out, but it's really, really well worth doing. Because when we looked, we found there were things we needed to change. Because we were here on our investment cycle. So we're kind of moving into that, paying off the Series A shareholders, that first round of capital, and looking to move on to the next stage. Talking to our Series A people and discussing what it was they expected and agreeing what it was they were going to get. And then from that, looking at what we had in the tank to do our next stage of growth. So a critical moment for Better World Books. And that's happening, it's been happening now for the last 4 months, currently happening for probably another month or two yet, and then we'll be through that period. That's where we are right now. with our eyes in the future on possible public market listing or some kind of private equity deal down the track. The other option is that you don't do those things, but you actually look to take control back of the company as a private concern. So here we are, right up to speed, right up to today, as we look back and say, well, some of the business model we maybe would have chosen to do differently to make sure this company is built to last. We're looking at paying back the Series A investors, and we're reviewing those book collection sources. Those 1,500 boxes, when we put them out at a rush, and many of them have worked really, really, really well. Some haven't worked so well. Some don't fill up with books. And when you go and collect them, there's not many books in there, and that is the case month after month, and you realize we're never going to get any books out of this. All we're going to do is drive a truck there and drive a truck back with very few books in. It's very expensive to do that. So we're beginning to pull some of those boxes out now, take them back to base, and rethink where they're going to go next. The 4,000 libraries, not all of them turn a profit. We found a case of one library was sending us one box of books. The box would be about the size of this lectern, the top of this lectern. They're sending one box of books back from California to Indiana via UPS on a regular basis. And if you imagine the cost per book, if there's like 20 books in that box, it's very hard to make any money out of that once you get those books back to the warehouse, chuck out the ones you don't want, and sell the ones you do want. So we're a social enterprise, but we're also a business. We're for profit. We have to make sure that we're still going to make money, even while we do our best to do good around the world. There's a slide at the very end where you'll see some of that good that we've done. And remainder deals are where we've gone to publishers who, at the end of a book's life cycle, they'll come to us and they'll sell us remainder books, and then we'll go online and we'll sell them online. The benefits of scale and logistics and everything else, we had to make sure that we're having to make sure we've got those benefits. We're renegotiating all of our contracts, because as we've grown so fast, some of those relationships we put together in the early days, we've kind of outgrown them. And we certainly need to go back and renegotiate them, right? Because now we're way bigger than we were back then when we did those original deals. And we're seeing the prices to move things around going down. All the prices that we pay for everything are beginning to drop. And we need to professionalize everything we do. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. Behave like a grown-up. There was still a sense of us being a scrappy entrepreneur within the company. But we're at a point in our life stage where we really needed now to get on with running the company like a real company. Slightly painful to do that. It sounds weird to say it out loud to you guys, but it is quite difficult to do when you're being used to being able to behave like a scrappy startup. We're reviewing that pricing strategy I mentioned and our third-party market listing strategy. So we're thinking about, could we list on just some marketplaces? Because some marketplaces are more expensive to list on than other marketplaces. And we're reviewing our website strategy. We're reviewing what we give and focus where we can't have it, where we can have an impact. So we're all about telling stories right now. I want to be able to say to people who come to our website, here are 30 examples where we have spent money and that money has done good. And here is the school we built. Here is the library we built. Here is the library we filled. Many of our giving programs right now are to larger organizations, and those larger organizations don't tell us exactly what they do with the money or with the books that we donate. And we're focusing more on social media. Altogether, we're building our capability for the future. So as we looked at the challenge that we were facing in this startup to stay up, we came back to people, because you always come back to people. That's always where you go. Wherever you start, you'll end up here on looking at your teams and your ability to deliver. And this was a Economist Intelligence Unit survey from May 2012. They said, what do CEOs worry about? And sure enough, over at this end here, you've got insufficient talent and insufficient leadership within the organization. And we found that's where we were at. We had these great scrappy entrepreneurs. We had passionate, driven people, people who had worn 5 or 6 different hats as the company grew from nothing to become this $68 million company. But now we needed people with more experience, more knowledge, more capability. And as I looked around to try and find out how to communicate this to you, how could I explain this to you, the thing I landed on again was Jim Collins in Good to Great, and he talks about this build-up and breakthrough approach, and he talks about discipline. And I thought, this is awesome. I hadn't actually seen this until I researched for this presentation to you guys. And what's clever about this is he talks about disciplined, and we were kind of ill-disciplined as a startup. We didn't have that discipline. We were having too much fun to be very disciplined. And we realized as we began to pay back our Series A shareholders that we were going to need to be a bit more disciplined about things going forward. I'll come back to level 5 leadership in a minute, and I'll also talk a bit more about the hedgehog concept. But the big one here is confront the brutal facts. That's really, really important. We learned we had to get down and dirty in all of our numbers. We had to really understand our business at the detailed level. We had to dig in deep. Where are we spending our money? What were our payment terms? This is really mundane, boring stuff. It's stuff I remember from being in a big corporate. And a bit of me was a bit sad that we were having to do that in this scrappy startup. But we had to, because we're looking at our money, looking at our cash flow much more closely. We had to introduce a culture discipline amongst the team. So not just to have a gut feeling about something, but to demonstrate things with facts, use analysis, show outcomes, make a pitch to other colleagues in the team, some of whom have been friends for a long, long time. And use technology accelerators. So we had used technology really well in the early days, and that had got us our growth. But technology changes real fast. You have to keep up with it. You have to keep changing. Indaba is no longer cutting edge. We actually sold Indaba quite recently. And now we're looking at a different solution from a third party that will take us to the next level. It'll also take us into different products than books. So we'll be able to diversify away from books, keep books, but diversify away from that to spread our risk a little bit more. So here's the hedgehog concept. And what I liked about this was this description, piercing clarity. And that's the piece I took away from that. That's what we're having to do, piercing clarity. It's a great expression. We're looking at everything. We connect with this deeply passionate piece because we are deeply passionate. I joined Better World Books back in the UK at a time when I was also interviewing for other companies, Apple and also Amazon. And I said to my son, who was then 12, I said, these are the options in front of me. What shall I do? And he said, Dad, you've always said that you wanted to go into something where you could give something back, where you felt at the end of the day you would achieve something. Which blew me away a little bit because he's 12. But I listened to him and I thought, he's right. I do want to do something like that. And that's what drew me to Better World Books. There's a lot of people like that in Better World Books who are deeply passionate about what we do. Most people that join us, these professional people I mentioned, they come for that more than anything else because they're sick and tired of being in a big corporate. The resource engine is that cash generation I talked about. And being the best, everybody should try and be the best at what they do. And that's what all companies should try and do, at least in one aspect of what they do. So for us, our input is getting those books in. Our process is processing the books in our warehouse. And the output is being on all these marketplaces that we're on and being really good at pricing those books and selling those books. What are we best at? Or is there something within each of those little steps where we are the best, where we can be the best? And that's something we're looking at really closely right now. The other thing he mentions there is having discipline to say no thank you. So what's really good about scrappy startups is you love looking at new opportunities and new things. We almost became addicted to new stuff. So everybody would want a new project. And actually, as we made this change, this pivot, we did lose a few people who loved new stuff so much that they didn't like this place we were going to right now, where we were being much more introverted and much more back to basics. And these guys were saying, well, actually, we want to go somewhere where we can keep doing new stuff. And that's a challenge for your business as well. How do you keep those real high performers and those superstars who only want change, who only want new stuff, who only want new projects? We've had to learn to say no thank you to some of those opportunities. The other thing that Jim Collins mentioned back there was level 5 leadership. And again, this really struck a chord with me. This moves up from highly capable individual to contributing member to competent manager to effective leader, and then to this executive role at the top of the company, and this group of people at the top of the company who ensure enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. I love that. We in the leadership team learned we had to still have a will. We couldn't just delegate. We couldn't just coach. We couldn't just encourage. We couldn't just facilitate. We actually needed to have more will. We need to say, we're going to do this. This is going to happen. I want your contribution, but we're going to take this direction. We're going to get this done. We're going to achieve this. We're going to hit this number. You have to have a will. And that was interesting for me, along with the personal community, to know your place in the world. And then this is the thing we've very recently done. We've had a bit of a leadership shake-up, a bit of a leadership change in our organization, because we believe that we need to get the right people on board, the right people in the team, and then decide where to go. That list of things I put up on there for you for 2013, 2014, that came from this newer group who were put together to take us forward into the next direction. And that's quite a different approach to the traditional approach, if you like, of deciding what you want to do and then lining up a group of people, going and hiring them to go and do it. It's a different style. So this is an image from a Soyuz rocket looking back as it breaks through the Earth's atmosphere and it achieves that escape velocity. And as I look at that, that's what we've got to do at Better World Books. And I think what we've learned is that you've got to get the right finance structure at the right time. So we've had that first round. We're paying that first round back. We're looking at refinancing for the future at the moment. We need to make sure we have that aligned with where we want to be in 5 or 10 years' time. We've got to get the right investors to ensure that happens. We need the right leadership style at the right time. We don't need that entrepreneurial leader anymore. That's not our style now. We need to move on from that to develop the company and to take it up to the next level, which might involve acquisition as well. We need the right business focus at the right time. So you remember I said we went and got the books first. We got the warehouse first, then we got the books. Then we went off and we did the marketing, put the website up, and so on. And it's always cash all the time. And I know you've probably heard this over and over again. Cash is king. It really is. If anybody tries to persuade you otherwise, don't believe them, they're lying. Cash is always going to be king. And what we've tried to do is keep the vision of our founders in place all the way through. We've still got one of the original founders. In fact, we've got two founders. One's on the board and one is on the executive team and still plays a role. Chris Fuchs, he still plays a role in the company. So they're still very much in the business, and they've been awesome at standing to one side a little bit and letting people like me come in and help to develop the business. And that's been really useful for me. None of us have been crowded out by those founders. They've supported us. And I promise you some numbers at the end. This is what we've achieved. So I look at that, and I look at the things we're wrestling with right now as we try and go from this startup to stay up. Excuse me. And you look back at that and go, well, we've done a lot already. There's so much more we can do, but we've already got a lot done. We've raised $18 million for literacy in libraries. We've donated almost 15 million books now worldwide. 1 million books processed a week. There's the revenue number. And almost 200 employees now in the US and the UK. And we achieved that status of being a founding B Corp member. So I promised time for questions at the end. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd like to take questions.
Hi, thanks for speaking. So in the beginning, you were talking about, you gave the metaphor about the gravity holding you back and you need the next push. What do you think was your biggest, I just forgot my word. I'm sorry.
That's
What
right.
was your biggest, oh my gosh. Between your first original objectives and your the new objectives in 2013 and 2014, what was the hardest to accomplish, or where did you find the biggest difficulty in getting that next push in either of those, or from there?
I think it was, thank you for the question. I think it was getting from the excitement of growth to realizing we had to stop and actually look at what we had done. Because the temptation is to keep growing. We've had revenue growth year after year since we came into existence. We've never been down year on year. We've always been up by 10, 15, 20%. And that gets you into a mindset that that will always happen and that all your problems will be solved if you just keep growing. So I think the initial issue we had was saying, we just need to stop and look at some of the stuff we're building behind us. Because when you look over your shoulder, it's not all rosy. The stuff, even the revenue's growing like crazy, the stuff we're getting wrong we need to fix. So it was that moment when we stopped and said, let's look over our shoulder.
You mentioned Jim Collins and how a lot of his work aligns with Better World Books and your culture. And I wanted to ask, do you believe that you have achieved level 5 leadership?
It's a great question. I think we're getting there. I think we're going through that process right now. It's part of that discovery. We need to look over our shoulder. We said we need to change the way we lead, because we'd gone from having those entrepreneurial leaders who were, follow me, and they'd run off into the distance, to people who are much more vision and mission aligned to where we need to be in the future, which is that level 5 style leadership, where we're giving room, but we're ensuring our will is very much there. I was brought up my management training was in the 80s. It was all about coaching and stuff like that. And so, I've always tried to be a delegator, and I've tried to let people go. But certainly the feeling I've had, what I've experienced with what Jim Collins has done, is you need to still exact your will on what's going to get achieved. So no, we're not there yet.
I'm over here.
Sorry.
With the increasing popularity with ebooks for textbooks or just reading books, how do you think the company will adjust to using those instead of hardback, since I think less are being printed now?
It's a great question. That's one of the things we're looking at right now is in the US, the fiction market was 14% down last year. Non-fiction was about flat. So what seems to be happening is people are reading their fiction on a Kindle or on an ebook device, e-reading device. They're still reading their non-fiction, though, and they're sort of coffee table books. They're still reading physical books like that. So what we've had to look at is we don't need to keep as many of the fiction books we currently get. We need to stop accepting quite so many of them. And that's led us to go to libraries and say, would you mind pre-flushing, so pre-scanning, some of what you send us, so not all of it comes back to us. And what we're trying to do is figure out a way where we could get them recycling revenue by them recycling locally. So if we can line them up with a recycler, they can go and take the fiction books that we don't want. The library gets an income. We still get the books we do want. Thank you.
Hi. So you briefly talked about donating books to Africa, and I was wondering if you did that to South America, Asia, and if not, if you guys plan on doing that anytime soon?
Yeah, we've done it to Asia quite a bit. We've had a number of we have this thing called a LEAP grant, where we put aside money that isn't allocated to a given charity. We put it into a big pot, and then once a year we have 6 grants that we dedicate. They're about $15,000 each, and we use that as a grant for libraries and non-libraries to apply for. And some of the guys that have won that are being out in Asia. South America less so, but yeah, definitely in Asia.
Over here. With so many boxes and bins around the world, I guess for donation, like I've seen multiple boxes on campus. How are those bins? Do you know how they're tracked and taken care of so that books don't languish in donation purgatory in those locations forever?
Donation purgatory, I love that. Can I use that?
Yeah, feel free.
Well, we have a sensor inside. It's a volumetric sensor, and it knows when a box is filling up. So it's a device with a laser on it, but it seems to us really clever when they sold it to us. And it tells us that a box is filling up. So we get a text message that says, you need to empty me, and then we send a truck to empty the box. So it's rare that they end up in purgatory. We do, however, if we haven't heard from a box for a period of time, we'll go out to that box and empty it anyway, just in case the sensor is broken. We still get people ring us up and they'll say, your box is overflowing, can you do something about it, please? Which is a nightmare. We don't want that to happen, but it can happen.
For your advertising, you talked about the book drop-offs and the vans that actually have the advertisement on the side of the vans. And you briefly talked about social media. What do you plan to do with that as far as advertisement goes, and exactly what do you want to do with the social media?
Yes, great question. So we spent previously $120,000 a year on a PR campaign, and we looked at that really closely and said, is that really giving us what we need? Is that giving us the return that we need? My view is it doesn't. My view is that social media is where it's at these days, not just because it's cool, but I think because you can have a conversation that's much more real with people who are using what you do. In our case, they're buying books off us, or they're supporting what we do with the charity money that we spend. So I think social media is where we should be at. We should spend our money on doing that. So we're just starting that right now. My social media guy was over at the B Corps retreat a couple of weeks ago, hooking up with lots of people who are in other B Corps to try and find ways that we can link up with them and have more of a community within a community, and then go out to the world and talk about what we're all doing.
Hi. Audible? Good.
Yeah.
Hi. I think it's really cool what you're doing. I just wanted some clarification. So you mentioned that these books are going to different continents such as Africa. What countries specifically?
It's over on East Africa.
In
so
Eastern
it's
Africa?
along that area there. So Books for Africa, we work with really closely. They've got people on the ground who execute. So we don't do anything ourselves in country because there's people who have got established ways of getting in country from the ports. So we work with those guys.
Right. So that brings me to my other question. So how does your company see itself, I guess, being more active in the community involvement process? It's one thing to have these books sent to to different countries, but do you feel that there's more that you guys can do as a collective in terms of actually being on the field or being where these books are being donated and maybe helping certain initiatives there?
Yeah, there are. There's only so many of us, and the people who work in our warehouse, most of our employees are warehouse workers, and many of them, they've never actually been outside Indiana. It's where they live and where they work. What we're going to do is introduce, as part of this social media process and sort of steering money away from PR, we're going to create grants which people in the warehouse can apply for. So if they've got something they're really passionate about, the example I'll give you is in the UK warehouse we did this. We had a guy who, and this again is an example in Africa rather than the US, but it could easily be in the US as well. There was a setup in Africa where they were using soccer to get access to young people who had trouble reading, who didn't enjoy reading. And he said, I want to donate some books to these guys. Can you pay for me to put a pallet of books together and send them to these guys? They weren't one of our registered charities. We'd never heard of them before. We'd had nothing to do with them before. We talked to Books for Africa. They didn't know about them. But because it was one of our employees, we were able to say, yeah, we'll do it. So we put together a pallet. He sent them out. And he was thrilled. He got pictures back. He's since been promoted twice within our warehouse because the guy is so engaged with our company. So from a business point of view, as well as from a social point of view, an employee point of view, it was an amazing outcome. So we want to do more of that. We're also going to do more work. I'm trying to change the grant process so that some of it happens actually in the local community. So a library can choose who gets the money and make that local to that library. Perhaps it's local schools that need help, and they can donate books straight to that school in their community in the States or in the UK as well. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things you hear a lot in the startup community, particularly from investors, is creating an exit plan. So you're talking to here that you wish that you had early on, or that needs to be in your DNA, that you want to build a company that lasts. So my question to you, is an exit plan in conflict with social enterprise?
That's a brilliant question. It's one I've been wrestling with for the last 12 months. It shouldn't be. It needn't be. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. It really shouldn't be in conflict. I think the issue is if you're doing a startup, if you're creating a startup and it's a social enterprise, are you really of the right mindset at that point in your business to make the right call from an investment standpoint that is aligned with your underlying values, those core social values that you have that led you to set that company up? I think a lot of what I've said is about bringing on the right people during the growth of the company. That person is most important at the very beginning to say, just make sure you ask the right questions, Just make sure that the detail that's in the agreement for the exit plan is aligned with what you want to achieve, and that you've chosen the right investor. It's really, really important. And I would never have known that before joining Better World Books. Great. It's a great question. Like I said, I've been wrestling with it for the last 12 months.
Did you get the right investors?
That would be a difficult question to answer, wouldn't it? We've got great investors. They've stuck with us from the beginning. Many of them are local investors, a number of different investors. Many of them are local to Indiana. Many of them know the guys that started the company. We're the biggest investment they have in a fairly small investment round for them, and we're the most successful by far. And that creates pressure on them in terms of what they want to do with that fund to pay back their investors. So it's the actual shape of the investment you've got to really be careful about. But I wouldn't criticize them for that. They're great.
I have a question over here. You mentioned that the warehouse has over 5 million books in it, and y'all process over 1 million books a week. So what type of process do y'all use to like filter through all the books? I mean, you mentioned it, but then once the books are processed, how do you not keep them like just piling up? And like if a book never goes out, like does it stay for so long and then get filtered out? And what do you do with it then if someone never like wants that particular book?
It's our biggest challenge operationally. It's really tough. So I was in the warehouse the other day and I found a book and picked the book up. I got my smartphone and I scanned the barcode on the book to see what price it was. And it was like $78. And I went back and it had dust on it. So I went back inside. I looked up on the system on Indaba. When did we get this book? It's like 5 years ago. I was thinking, one, how's it stayed on the shelf 5 years? Two, how can it be priced at a price we're never going to sell it at? You know, and you get those things happen. Because it's 5 million books, you can't manage on the basis of that one book. It gives you a picture, but you can't manage on that one alone. So what we do is we have various systems that we use to kind of color code the warehouse and tell us where the kind of hot spots are for books that we haven't sold, that we've had for a period of time. And then we go and we clear those areas out where the majority of the color code is, right? So it's more efficient to do it that way. So that's how we handle it. But we have to use analysis. We have to use, on the way in, we scan every book. Because we give money back to the libraries who give us the book, every book that comes in, we have to know where it came from, as well as you know, record the fact we've got the book. And then we have to also record the condition of the book. So those 5 million books, they can be different conditions. You can have different copies of the same book, but that are different conditions from different libraries. It's endless. So yeah, that's what they built in Daba.
Scott, I have a question about the business model and how Better World Books, it says that you answer to all stakeholders equally. And I wonder, theoretically, is it possible for you to operate at a loss in which that obviously there's a social mission that you have, and through these literacy programs and through these donations, you could theoretically get yourself into a situation in which you're operating at a loss. Is that something that is possible, considering that it is a for-profit company, or in order to save the business, if it were to get in that, I appreciate this is hypothetical, would you scale back those commitments so that you can survive?
Well, as a B Corp, we're trying to demonstrate, and a triple bottom line company, we're trying to show that you can operate at a profit and do social good at the same time. If we got ourselves into a situation where the business was going to go under, you'd have to say, well, if we didn't exist tomorrow, what would be missing from the world, if you put it that way? And we would probably have to go to our beneficiaries and have a conversation with them about that situation and go from there. But you know, my job, the executive team's job, is to make sure that never happens. That's what we have to do. Like any other company, you have to run it at a profit if you're a for-profit company.
Alan, last questions.
Thanks, Scott. This is actually sort of related to all these last few questions you've gotten. That is, typically when an investor invests in a business, they're looking to maximize their rate of return, correct? And so when you find an investor, you have to find an investor that's sort of a unique animal that maybe is not necessarily after revenue, return investment, because you give away $18 million and that's income that could have gone to the investor some way. I guess I have really two questions. One, From an operational standpoint, how do you decide between the social mission and the profit mission in making operational decisions when recognizing that some decisions you make regarding your social mission are going to reduce the wealth possibilities for your investors? And I guess the second part of the question is, do you draw your investors from the same pool of investors that other for-profits go after, or is there sort of a special class of investor that looks specifically for these social enterprise opportunities?
Thank you. Great question. So I think that the B Corp Association helps us find investors that maybe are different to your usual investor. So to answer the last question first, day to day we find ourselves having to make a choice sometimes between profitability and social good. And we just have to make sure that every time we come to make those decisions, we honor both. So we look at both and we weigh them up. And then we look back and we look forward over the decisions that we're making. We make sure that on balance, we're doing good and we're making a profit. So it's very hard to describe it any other way than that way. Best example I could give is the desire to tell more stories is going to lead us to be able to demonstrate a lot more good with the money that we currently donate. We donate money blind at the moment. We often give money without any requirement on the people we give the money to that they demonstrate what they've done with the money. And we think that's probably inappropriate. We should be asking for more stuff back, videos, pictures, whatever it might be. It might be that the balance of all of that is that we donate less in that particular example, but what we do donate, we can demonstrate we did good, something happened. Yeah, and then the question about localization, we can also demonstrate that we're doing more good locally in communities in the United States and the UK to help with literacy rates over here and over in the UK as well. So it's a balancing act all the time, and that's actually the exciting part and the piece that keeps me awake at night compared to the corporates I came from. In the corporates, there's one thing to do. You had to just make money for the shareholders and for the company and for whoever was on top of the company. It's different with a company like this, a social enterprise. You have to make money, but you have to do it in such a way that you do good for people as well.
Thank you so much for coming, Scott. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks.